What we've noticed is that some tools that we implemented 2-3 years ago that seemed great up until last year, there's some new things that are coming out that are just leapfrogging them. And so you don't want to just be plugging tools in willy-nilly, but you always have to be kind of looking at, are you using the best tools for what your priorities are? So it's a combination of making our team more efficient, making sure that we meet our priority goals. And of course, there's a cost return on investment aspect that I have to position with our CFO to make sure that what we're doing is the best investment for the business.
You're listening to RevOps Champions, a podcast created for B2B leaders to help you align your people, streamline your processes, trust your data, and leverage technology in order to grow your business. We're your hosts, Brendan Deneville, CEO and co-founder of Dynamico,
and Amy Weaver, Dynamico's marketing director. Describe to us what you're up to at Parallax. Your role is Senior Vice President of Sales and Marketing, and you've been there around a year. Is that right?
That's correct.
What are some of the things that are your current focus and potentially challenges that you're facing?
Yeah, our platform helps digital agencies, software development companies to improve their resource planning to help, improve margins and utilization of their resources. So we're all about that. So my team is account execs, sales engineers, marketing, revenue operations, and BDRs as part of the sales team. So that's my team. So we continue to improve how we're going to market in terms of our messaging and our programs, but also kind of the tools we use to ensure that we're doing things in a way that, helps us to track from initial contact through to customer engagement in a way that, helps our customers really understand how we can best work with them and then be able for us to track things along the way.
Okay. And I was looking at your LinkedIn. It looks like you filled a revenue operations manager role recently.
We did, yeah.
And that's somebody that you said would report to you?
Yeah, they're in my group. Yeah, they've started about 3 weeks ago.
Okay, awesome. And so what sort of experience and skill set were you looking for in that position?
That's a good question. I was looking for somebody who's, done that role before, being able to look at both sales and marketing in terms of metrics. What trends are we seeing? Is our automations all working right? Are there anything that we can do to make the process smoother, more efficient for the BDRs, marketing, and the sales team? And then also to make sure that, the leadership has the data that we need to be able to make strategic decisions.
Okay.
Well, maybe if I could kind of go back for a second, because I loved your very concise response on, what that RevOps role really does, because it's essentially all the stuff that we talk about all the time on the show, which is data, or you use the words metrics, automation, which is, of course, the technology part is what you're helping automate. And the processes, of course, which are exactly what we're trying to do to automate to make sure that the processes are becoming increasingly more efficient.
Right.
And then you talked about essentially what we talk about is the insights for leaders in any group to be able to make the best decisions based on the metrics, the processes, and the automation to continuously improve what you're doing. So I love that answer. So what leading up to deciding I'm guessing as a leadership team, well, we need somebody in this role. What were some of the things that you were seeing that sort of led you to believe that you could really do with someone in that role?
I think there was pockets of great things that were happening across marketing, BDR, sales, customer success. And I think, we reached a point where we needed to bring that all together to be able to see those touch points and the trends that are happening around there, connect some of our systems. So we really started more on the sales and marketing side, and the CS side has been kind of brought on as a next wave to make sure that our CS tools are integrated into our HubSpot CRM so that once a customer moves from a prospect to a closed customer, that, it moves over to our CS team, and the continuity for the customer, relationship is consistent and doesn't drop on our side from sales to CS.
Oh, really good. Just as a sort of a side note, are you using HubSpot for marketing, sales, and service?
Just for sales and marketing, we use other tools for the CS side. But on the CS side, we do have customers are in our HubSpot environment, but for CS tracking and tools, they use other tools that integrate into HubSpot.
Okay. It's just always interesting because obviously you can integrate the same product across teams, or you can integrate different products across teams. But I think the important thing that you mentioned, which we talk about a lot all the time, is the fact that you are integrating it all. And I like the way that you position that, where you realize that you had these sort of pockets of greatness across marketing, sales, and CS, but you knew that the real value came when you integrated them all, brought them all together, so that the data could flow freely between all three into one, what we call, single source of truth.
Right.
So that makes a lot of sense.
Since you mentioned implementing new technology, would you be able to tell us some things that you consider when it's time to make that sort of decision and how you guys go about that internally?
Yeah. I think it starts by, the priorities of the team. As we go into Q3 here, what are some of the OKRs that we have that are, the highest priority that the team has, and how can those be met in the best way they can, whether you're looking at, 3 months or longer time frame. And, look at kind of what are a lot of the manual activities that you're doing that are taking time of your team that they could be spending doing other more important
higher
aspects
level,
of their job.
valuable. Yeah,
valuable. I think there's a term. So, as we look at kind of our priorities, our current team's work situation, we kind of decide, okay, these are tools that we should be looking at. Now, that could be a replacement to an existing tool. It could be a brand new system, which we've always kind of evaluating some, because what we've noticed is that some tools that we implemented 2-3 years ago that seemed great up until last year, there's some new things that are coming out that are just leapfrogging them. And so you don't want to just be plugging tools in willy-nilly, but you always have to be kind of looking at, are you using the best tools for what your priorities are? So it's a combination of making our team more efficient, making sure that we meet our priority goals. And of course, there's a cost return on investment aspect that I have to position with our CFO to make sure that what we're doing is the best investment for the business.
Absolutely. And then once it's time to roll it out, do you guys do a phased approach? Will you nominate kind of a pilot group of users to be the first ones to implement? How does that work?
If it's a very point solution that's just working, like let's say with the BDRs, like a sales tool of some sort, then that's pretty easy to be managed within that group. It touches, a few people, just a certain amount of data. So we don't have to worry about a pilot. It's usually a couple week, 3 week, 4 week, process. But the more it touches across the company, I wasn't here when we implemented HubSpot, but I can imagine the same thing for HubSpot when we moved from whatever we had before. I don't even know what it was, but that would have been, probably a longer process. And maybe we wanted a pilot with a little group to make sure that we have it set in terms of the processes, the data, the implementation, the training, the support aspect to make sure that it rolls out correctly. So it kind of depends on the scope of the technology.
Okay.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And then, George, whether it's at Parallax or any organizations where you've worked in the past, whether it was internally or externally, and knowing that so much has changed in the last few years when it comes to like the RevOps function, and I'm guessing a lot of people even listening to this show are trying to learn more about what is RevOps and how do we incorporate more and more of it into our organization. Who would you say is the best person to be responsible for doing that continuous tech audit to prevent the tech bloat that you alluded to earlier, where you talked about a couple of products that you started using, and then suddenly 2 or 3 other things leapfrog that in their abilities. So you then have to change one out, put the new one in. But that's happening across all functional areas in the business. Where does that responsibility fall, either at Parallax, or where do you think it should fall ideally in an organization?
Well, let's see. I have a few questions before I can answer that answer. But I think it ultimately, as the head of the sales marketing group, I need to guide the organization in terms of what I think we need in terms of people, process, technology. So, it starts by kind of setting the vision by the functional leader, and then the people at the manager level, like our marketing manager or BDR manager or sales engineer manager, if they have ideas of things that they think they can make their function more efficient or impactful, I'm always open to ideas on that. But I also kind of want to make sure that they're vetting it with other people within the organization to see how they could potentially use that technology. And then ultimately, what I don't want to do is kind of piecemeal a bunch of technologies together without kind of an overall plan. So, working with the other functional group leaders, like the head of product, the head of CS, the head of finance or operations, making sure that we are looking across the organization, saying these are the priorities across the organization, and here's how these new technologies would fit. So it's a multi-level answer, I think, to your question, but it's a good one. It works a little differently in different organizations. Sometimes you have a very strong, CTO who's really involved with kind of directing the ship on the technologies that they use or don't want to use. And then sometimes it's left to the operational leaders of the different functional teams to come up with a plan and synthesize that across the leadership.
Yeah, that's very much what we see as well in the work that we do. It's one of the challenges, I think, why a lot of organizations struggle with this very concept or this issue of technology bloat is because it is really a cross-functional job. And if you don't have a CTO or someone who's in that position of authority who can collect all the information from everybody and say, okay, so that new point solution for CS or sales or whatever, we need to get that on our roadmap, but we need to roll it on at the same time as we're rolling something else off, which means we're going to have to do it next quarter. So there's like more strategic planning involved, which that's, of course, the ideal scenario, right? And I think unless you have that scenario, it's just doing the best that you can through good communication across leadership of these are the tools that are going to help us move faster in the next 90 to 180 days. Does it make sense to do this now or do we wait kind of thing? Yeah.
Yeah. It also depends, I'm thinking about like a early stage company, the CEO, sometimes the CEO comes from a technology world or software development or product or sales or operations. So depending on where that CEO comes from, they have certain strengths and weaknesses around the technology and the operational aspect of the business. So if they're coming from the sales side, they need to have an operational leader or a technology leader that can help kind of scope that and plan that. Our situation here, our CEO is, comes from the development side, and he's very technical and very strategic at the same time. So he laid the foundation for the early stage of the company, but now we're bigger and it's passing down to the functional team. And so it relies on us to work together in a tighter way because he can't be seeing everything around the business that's needed in terms of new technology and solutions. He might ultimately be kind of the approver on bigger aspects, but we were an earlier company. He was probably much more involved with like, fill this gap with this technology because he was, closer to every aspect of the business.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is just part of the whole life cycle of growing and scaling a business, right? So I guess one of the things specifically I'd like to talk about is we have similar target audience. So your target audience, from what I can recall, are digital agencies, consultancies that are teams of 50 plus people. We're doing a lot of work in the consulting space, but more in the AEC industry, so architecture, engineering, construction. But ultimately, they're all professional services businesses. We're, of course, one ourselves, even though we're often confused with being a technology company. We're not a technology company, which is why we partner with technology companies. So take a client of Parallax that's maybe 150 or 200 people, which is similar to a client of ours that is 150 or 200 people, both professional services businesses. A lot of them who are going to be, listening to what it is that we're talking about here. Do you have any insights on how they should structure their business? Because as you know, one of the reasons that those companies are using Parallax is for resource management, because one of the ways that you scale professional services businesses is by hiring more people, right? Or as you scale, you need to hire more people, at least until we all figure out the whole LLM and AI component. So how would you say professional services firms, lower mid-market size firms should structure their RevOps teams, knowing that like in our space or in the AEC space, they don't talk about RevOps because they don't typically have dedicated sales teams. They typically have a marketing department that's very sort of brand focused, but they don't do a lot of, automation and demand gen and that kind of stuff. Any thoughts or insights?
Well, our platform kind of instigates change in terms of helping our customers get the right processes to the right people so that you can scale the business. So being able to visualize the resources that you need and the potential revenue and the margins of those projects, you need to have people entering in projects into a CRM, like a HubSpot, that carries through into Parallax, brings in your time tracking information, and then you can look at your financials of your projects and then decide your resource plan accordingly. And so the revenue operations really is different than us because we're selling, software as a service and our implementation services. They're basically selling professional services team members and the resources available to them. So they have to think in terms of maximizing those resources at the right time and be able to know when to hire the right person at the right time, looking at the margins of those projects and make sure that they're maximizing those. They're not over servicing or under servicing clients, making sure that they know, like I said, when they should hire. And then ultimately that profit margin, you want to continue to increase your profit margins as well as your utilization, because that's where you can get more revenue through the company with the same amount of people until you actually have to hire or contract out. So the revenue operations aspect of a customer of ours flows through to all those processes, not just on the, on the selling side. Ours is a little bit more different, like I said.
Yeah. I was hoping you might have some playbook that would be super valuable, but it is challenging because RevOps ultimately comes out of the technology space.
Yeah.
But I think we all know that there's absolutely a value play in professional services. We're, part of the quest of this podcast is how do we figure that out and help professional services teams figure out how they essentially use the alignment that comes from RevOps to power and help them scale their businesses.
Yeah. I think one of the things that helps also is, even though a lot of companies find this challenging, is to begin to look at the commonalities across all your service deliveries and start to templatize those and say, okay, this project, I'm just going to make this up, a mid-sized web design project needs a project manager, a designer, and a developer for, 3-4 weeks. And then you can kick off your resourcing according to that and then customize it depending on the customer activity. But if you have those pre-built templates, you can start to look at your pipeline and make some conclusions through the process, even though they're not going to be 100%, but it gives you a framework to start from.
Mm-hmm.
And I attended a Bureau Digital event where we were brainstorming around a lot of, how to templatize your services so that you can scale better than making everything custom from, the ground up. And that was a very interesting discussion because everybody's in a different place. Some people were like, nope, we've never done that. Some people were like, we've got all the templates all figured out and everywhere in between. So it was kind of interesting.
Sure. Yeah, that's a really good insight.
So thinking back, it doesn't necessarily have to be from your time at Parallax either, but thinking back to your other roles, what were some characteristics of the teams that you felt like were able to scale efficiently, kind of had it figured out, well-oiled machine situation versus the ones where they maybe hit some plateaus or struggled a little bit more to go through those phases of growth?
I think there's a few aspects that play into that. One is the unique value proposition of the offering in terms of, are you hitting something that people really are feeling the pain? And number one, they know they have that pain because I've been, I was a consultant for 6 years to a number of early stage companies. And even though the CEO or the leaders thought there was a pain, there was so much education to get to the customer to explain to them that they had that pain. It just was, the sales process was too difficult. So starting with a unique selling proposition of a pain point that the target customer understands and believes that they have. That's the first thing. Second was, making sure that the leaders across the company were all rowing in the same direction. I've been in situations where some people wanted to go after big customers or a certain submarket or small customers or consumer play. And if you're not all on the same page on that first target that you're going after, it's going to be hard to scale. And I think tightening your target is important because a lot of companies, they're so excited about like the shiny objects out there. Like we can go after this market, this market. Yeah, exactly. So we're focused on very specific markets and solving that problem until maybe later when we go to adjacent markets, but let's get this market solved and capture a lot of great customers. So I think those are two things. And then there's also, even the board of directors, sometimes the board and the leaders, our CEO maybe aren't aligned. And I've been in situations where there's board members that are kind of pulling us over this way and our CEO wants to go this way, or not our CEO, previous company. And so alignment from the board, the CEO, and the leaders of the company is really important. And then not overspending early in your launch for things that are not going to help your customers see the value you bring. Things like overspending on a building or trips or whatever it is. Like focus your funds on getting the right product out at the right time to the right market, and the rest of it can wait. So those are the things that I saw that really helped the customers that I worked with before.
Which I think are all, other than there's some things that of course are technology or SaaS business specific, but I think for the most part, those are very transferable to professional services businesses. Then, of course, if they're established businesses, like, so a lot of the companies that we work with have been around for 40, 50, 60, 70, 100 years. One of the benefits that they don't have is that startup mentality, which is part of the challenge that they're having, is they're still they were so successful, as my kids say, in the 1900s, but that doesn't work so well anymore. And the question is, how do they now use the technology and the access to data that they now have that they didn't have in the 1900s, where you could absolutely grow an incredible business just through relationships. And now it's a case of it's relationships and the technology and data and tools available to you to really focus on the relationships that are most valuable to you. I'm sure that you're seeing this as well with your customers that are, you mentioned earlier, a very common thing in the agency and consulting space is over delivering or under delivering. So some clients get more hours or fewer hours or more value or less value. And there's a myriad of different reasons. But if you can have the data and tools to help your team be better at spending time with the clients that are more likely to continue to grow and stay with you, of course, that's what you want to do. So it's not just investing in every relationship, it's investing in first in the relationships that have the most legs, as it were. And then if you have excess capacity, then you move on to the sort of the B opportunities. And then if there's anything left, then of course the C. But it's really hard to do that if you don't have the tools and data.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, I don't know, customers in our market are probably not like this, maybe some more in the manufacturing or other markets that have been around a lot longer. They still have some technologies that have been with them for many, many years. And it's hard to move those into more nimble, cloud-based or whatever, accessible data. So you need to find what's the most important aspect of the data that you need to get access to be able to make decisions or be able to interact with. And then, APIs and through other means, be able to pull that into a tool like a HubSpot or whatever to be able to make those improvements in the business without having to lift and shift everything out of your old systems, because that's going to take forever. So that's an initial thought on that.
But to get the data out of those silos to improve visibility across other teams who don't have to now go into this antiquated software anymore.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So of the kind of areas that we touch on with all of our guests, we have the people component, the process, the data, and the technology. Where would you say your passion lies and where you focus a lot of your effort in your role?
I think it's literally split right a third, like process, people, technology.
Okay.
It's probably a cop-out answer, maybe from your side, because I think about how I spend my week and my time and prioritize our initiatives and review things. And it's, do we have the right people in the right role? And are we educating them and enabling them and updating them on what's going across the business? Do we have the right technology to enable them to do their job? And then do we have the process in place so that they can get their job done completely and efficiently, and that, we don't have a lot of rework and manual activity across those. So I think it's a combination of all three.
Okay.
Yeah, which of course is ideal. And Parallax is lucky to have you.
Yeah, thank you.
It is a fair point. I think you mentioned this earlier about CEOs, especially in startup businesses. They typically have a strength from their experience, right? And the successful ones hire other people who have the opposing strengths.
Complementary.
Exactly. George, I'd like to come back to something that you were saying earlier about the USP qualifiers. So this is a mistake that we've made over and over again at Dynamico too, which is we can see the pain 100 miles away with a particular business. But your point is that unless they see the pain and realize the pain, it doesn't matter, because the process to educate them of how that pain is showing up and affecting their business is just inefficient, right?
Right.
So in your experience working with professional services companies, do you see the lack of insight into, for example, having all your data in one single source of truth? In other words, where it's all integrated from marketing, sales, customer service, or whatever they call those teams in their companies. And this is a bit of a selfish question, but do you think that they see that as a problem, that they don't have real-time insights into their customer data, essentially?
Yeah, I think they do, but I'll caveat that in probably 2 or 3 different ways. One is it depends on the type of person who's interacting with us. If there's somebody that comes from project management, somebody from finance, someone from delivery, they'll have different views of that challenge. And some people have a view of, well, we have the data, it's all in a spreadsheet that's manually, entered. So it's just not efficient, but it's a bigger thing than that, right? Because not only is it not efficient, it might not be accurate, and you don't have the real-time insights to have people, as you scale, to be able to make decisions. So I think it depends on the person coming in and kind of their viewpoint about that. But I mean, a lot of professional services companies are still using spreadsheets to export things from HubSpot or from, their time tracking tool or whatever, and make decisions about resourcing. And that's where we're kind of plugging in so that they have that real-time access to one dashboard that has their current and projected projects coming up. But it's definitely a challenge that I see at almost every company. And the viewpoint, when we talk to somebody, they know they have a challenge. Sometimes we have to educate them, like, the challenge that you're seeing is just part of it. Here's the other part that you're seeing. And let's bring in these other team members to help kind of round out the discussion to really see how the value is of a solution like ours, or if you choose a competitor of ours.
Right. So what do you think are the most common business pain points or problems that, in your case, agencies are having for which they come to you? I mean, because, ultimately, obviously, they want to be better at resource planning, but what are the specific things that where one day the CEO or COO of an agency wakes up and says, okay, this is it. We need to stop this immediately.
Madness.
Yeah.
I think they have like a resource planning meeting every week, and every week they can only see like a week out because they know the deals that they've sold. I'm just kind of generalizing here, but and they can't see past a week or two. A lot of agencies I talk to are like that situation. So they need to be able to view past the week or two of their resource planning so that they can do the resource utilization plan for a broader, a longer period, so they can do the right staffing, see if they need contractors or somebody to hire, and bringing in the data from HubSpot or other CRMs, into that common platform allows them to look past the 1 or 2 weeks so they can do better capacity forecasting. And then secondarily, it's about the margins. Not secondarily, it depends on the company, but in other areas, the margins, they don't have a really viewpoint of sold versus actuals in terms of what did they deliver, how did it compare to the margins that they expected, and where they're getting for each of the projects that they're working on. So it's a combination of those things.
Yeah, so being able to see and plan further ahead, and then knowing ways that they can pull levers to improve their margins over time.
Correct. Yep, that's correct.
Very cool.
Well, we haven't talked about data as an asset or liability. Do you have a strong opinion one way or the other?
Yeah. Well, data is important if it's clean, accurate and accessible. So I would say those three things have to be in play. Whether it's in HubSpot of, small thing like duplicate records, which can cause major pain in the butts for the sales team, right? Or whoever, through to, the people right in the system. Are these our customers, and are they using these products? What were the invoices we sent them? Where's their contract? All that stuff from initial touch point all the way to servicing them is hugely important if you really want to have an efficient business that you scale. So that's definitely high on the priority list, to keep your data clean, updated, and secure and accessible.
Sure.
In your case, now that you have your RevOps manager, I believe is the title, right? That you recently had. And would that be a role at Parallax that they would fill? So ultimately, they're responsible for keeping everybody else accountable for keeping their data clean, accurate, and accessible?
Yes, that is correct. So her responsibility to kind of look at the big picture of the data accessibility and accuracy, but working with the owner of that area, whether it's, HubSpot or our, CS team or our finance platform, whatever it is, making sure that they know to, keep those in line with what our expectations are. And then she also would be looking at, ways that we can make that a more efficient process, whether we put in some automation, alerts, whatever, to make sure that we're keeping our data clean.
Just sort of quickly going back to your people process
technology,
because we typically talk about people, process, data, and technology. But your sort of 3-step one is the more common one that we've heard over and over again on this show and everywhere else. But if you don't include data in that formula, how do you think data fits into the people, processing, technology piece?
Yeah, that's a good question. Maybe I should have a fourth one because it brings more clarity to that aspect, which is important. I think I grouped it under technology, but the process touches the data. And the people touch the
Mhm.
data, but ultimately I think I had it in technology in my mind, and maybe that's where other people have it too.
Yeah, right. Or maybe I think what I've seen in some situations is the leaders that we're speaking to, for them, like the data is just a given. You have to have the data, and the data is helping you inform, how do you do a better job with your people, processes, and technology.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there's got to be a more intrinsic link. Some people say, well, the data is the lifeblood that makes all these other things work,
Yeah.
because otherwise, why do you need it? I mean, if you're
Yeah.
using spreadsheets are also data.
Mm-hmm.
The technology is not as robust as it used to be, but it's still technology.
Mm-hmm.
I always like to ask the question because clearly you're making it work. And one of the other things that I guess we've also heard over and over again with consultants who are consulting specifically around RevOps, as we do, one of the things they say is the first thing they want to find out when they start a new project with a new client is, what are your core reports,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which clearly is about data. So until you know what you're measuring, it's hard to know what your processes should be or how to keep your people set up for success. And then, of course, we have to do this all the time because we cannot do a technology implementation unless we're very clear on the processes and the data. So
Mm-hmm.
we always have to dig deep into process and data before we can do an implementation, which is one of the challenges that we run into, because people go, "Oh, you guys are technology experts. Let's implement HubSpot." And we're like,
Yeah.
"Yeah, that'll be what we'll do, but let's first figure out for your business, what are your processes and what are your core reports? In other words, what's the data that will make your business successful?"
Yeah. And I guess, what is the data that would make you successful? And if you can't get access to it right now, where does it live? Or if it doesn't live anywhere, where could it come from? And I think working
Mhm.
backwards from there is important to kind of unpack, where they need to go in terms of that first phase.
Yeah. And one of the answers that I often get is, it doesn't really matter how they say it or how we get there, but ultimately the answer is, well, we're not really trying to grow. In which case,
Mm.
well, if you're not trying to grow, then why do all this?
Yeah.
Again, back to your USP insight, for us, it's always important to remind ourselves that clearly if a company is not trying to grow or scale,
Mm-hmm.
there's no point us getting all excited about the opportunity that they have, because if they're not trying to grow for whatever reason, then they might not want to make this investment and go through all this change
Yeah.
if they're just trying to stay the same size.
Right. They could, either use their current technologies and just tweak them, or adjust some processes for that next phase if they're not, looking to grow in the next years. I agree with you.
Or if they're in a position where they can wait for a week or two for 3 people to run all the reports and put it on their desk,
Yeah, that might be okay.
it might be okay. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So, as we get close to time to wrap up, are there any pieces of advice that you would offer folks, whether it's in a RevOps capacity or aligning their people, process, and technology?
On the revenue operations, I would say there are some companies out there that have marketing operations and some that have sales operations that are disconnected. And I
Mm-hmm.
think, the bigger you get, that's easy to form. But there's a recent kind of over the last year or two, maybe you guys led the way, I don't know, but revenue operations kind of bringing that together at the top is
Mm-hmm.
important. And I think if you have sales operations and marketing operations in silo, I think, consider kind of merging that together, because looking at, your cost per lead or your cost for acquisition of a customer, or, whatever, if you don't have your marketing and sales information together, it's going to be harder to make those conclusions and decide some decisions about the company.
Absolutely.
And then ultimately bring in the customer success side too, so that there's that integration so that you can, flow your customer from one side to the other of the business.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I have talked to several people when I bring up revenue operations, and they say, "Oh, we have that." And I said, "Well, what do they do?" And they describe somebody who's in marketing operations, or they describe somebody who's in sales operations. They're different unless you really, think through kind of how to bring those together. So that's my thought about that.
Right. And align them around, if not the same KPIs, the ones that would feed into one another, to where
Yeah,
it's not like a me against you, like I get more credit or you get more credit.
right. Exactly. Because then if you bring your cost per lead and other marketing operations information forward, and then you bring your sales operations information forward, bring it to the leadership, it's a lot of thinking to kind of put that all together. So if you want your leaders to be able to make decisions about the business based on data from your team and your customers and the market, you need to look at those together.
Hmm.
Agree.
Yeah, which I think is sort of comes back to what you said at the very beginning. which is if you have pockets of good things in your organization, if they're not connected, you don't actually get the full value of being able to make better, faster decisions because, again, they're not integrated and they don't give the leadership team the insights that they need in real time to make those decisions. Yeah. Amy's probably sick of me using this analogy, but it's kind of like the pilot analogy. Or, when the first time you walk onto an airplane, when I was, I don't know, maybe 10, I walked onto a jet for the first time and looked left as I got up to the top and saw this cockpit with all these buttons and levers and whatever. I'm like, oh my gosh, these pilots must be incredibly smart. And of course they are. But I only learned much later in life that they only really track three things once they're up in the air. I think that's the same way that the leader of any functional area of a business or a CEO thinks. It's like, what are my three, you used the term OKRs earlier, what metrics, OKRs, KPIs, whatever it is. What are the three that I'm watching every day? And only if one of those is off, then I can go and dig a little deeper. So, in the case of a pilot, as long as their direction is what it should be, their altitude is what they should be, and their velocity or their speed is what it should be, they're fine. And if one of those suddenly changes for some reason, then they can start digging into, well, why is our direction off or why is our speed down?
Very true.
Which comes back, of course, to how data is so integrated into all this. And you cannot manage what you cannot measure.
That's very true. We say that around here too.
I'm sure you do. Knowing Tom, I'm sure that's very much part of what,
Yeah, exactly.
Well, have you had any projects recently with clients that you found particularly exciting or maybe had a better result than you expected and was a big win for the team internally?
Oh, man, there's several of those. I think without giving names, we've had a couple clients that we really helped them improve their operations in terms of, the utilization, project margins, visibility to the future. And that, I believe, helped them to get acquired by a larger entity. And now we're talking to that larger entity to see, because they're looking at our customers saying, you guys have some great best practices. Can we apply those to other parts of our sister companies? So that's just, very satisfying to help a company that we helped, go from here to here. And now we're going to maybe help their parent company to apply to their sister company. So we'll see where that goes. So I think that's exciting.
Very cool.
Very cool.
Yes.
Yeah, we have a multinational company that we haven't sold it yet, but we're in the middle of discussions and just be able to talk about, okay, we do this in Australia, we do this in Europe, and the South Africa team does this. It's just super interesting to see the differences in the technology and the people and the terminology and how they're trying to centralize and make more consistent so they can scale their business because they've acquired 4 or 5 companies in different countries that do different things. And so don't know where that one's going to end up, but it's been an enjoyable ride along the way. Those are a couple examples.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, I think that's probably a nice, happy note to end on.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah, especially when you mentioned South Africa in the last answer.
He did that just for you.
Somewhere I've always wanted to go. So someday.
Well, we'll figure it out, George.
Oh, please. Yeah.
We'll arrange a trip sometime in the next year or two.
All right. I'm there.
Well, thanks again so much for your time. It was great meeting you, George.
You too. Thanks for the time as well. And best of luck to you and going forward.
Did you enjoy this episode?
Find more at RevOpsChampions.com.